Let's talk about active and passive voice. Now, the key difference between active and passive is very different, and I want to talk a little bit about that before we went into our lessons. Okay, a key difference between active and passive is that active verbs shows the subject performing the action of the sentences, while passive verbs show the subject receiving the action of the sentences. We can also call active verbs active voice and passive verbs passive voice. Now, when we use active voice, it means that the subject of or the noun of a sentence is doing the action to an object, which is the receiver of the actions. For example, Sandra closed the door. In this sentence, close is an active verb in this sentences because the subject, Sandra, performed the action of closing the door, which is performed the adjective of closing the object, which is the door. But what about passive voice? Well, when you use passive voice, it means the subject or the noun of sentences is receiving the actions, which are the verb of the sentences. Well, the example would be the door was closed by Sandra. Now, okay, look at this. You can easily notice that the subject has been changed in this version of the sentences. The door, which is the subject, received the actions of being closed, which is what makes the sentences an example of passive voice. These two subjects in active voice and passive voice have the same meaning, but they use different structure of grammars, and they write differently too. Now, well, a lot of people would ask, then if active and passive voice are like that, then kind of hard to detect them. How can we detect it? Well, there are actually two clues to detect them easily. The first is linking verbs, and the next is using by. One way to often, but not always, spot the use of passive voice is to look for presence of linking verbs. The most common forms of linking verbs are the forms of the verb to be. So these would be word like is, am, are, was, were, etc. would be included as a linking verb. Not only that, but other common linking verb can also be appear, become, feel, grow, look, remain, seem, smell, sound, stay, taste, and turn. If we read sentences and we spot a linking verb, then we should then test to see if the object is receiving the action to make sure that the sentences is using passive voice. Similarly, the presence of the word by implies that the same action is being performed by someone, and that something is receiving the action, and this automatically creates a passive voice. And for example, the crime was observed by me. Okay, first we see that the author used was in the front of the verb observe. We can also see that the crime is receiving by the action of being observed, which is by me. However, the word by shows that the narrator is the one doing the observing, and that the crime is receiving the action of being observed. All this information together let us know that passive voice is being used in these sentences. Well, this is just a way to find out whether it is a passive voice. Now let's move on to active voice. Okay, I have to say, though, using passive voice is not grammatically incorrect. The fact that it's one layer than active voice can make it harder to understand. In the first example above, the active sentences use 4 words to communicate the same idea. In the first example above, the The active sentences uses 4 words to communicate the same idea, while the passive voice sentences use 6. I'll show you. Look, the first example shows only use 4 words to express it, while passive voice use over 6 words to express. This contributes to 3 reasons why active voice is generally preferred when we write. The first, it is that it is more powerful. The second, because it is more conscious. And the third, because it is easier to understand. Okay, so by removing extra words and forcing us to choose more specific, powerful words, by using the active voice, added to the overall strength and clarity of our writing. For these reasons, it is the preferred voice of many writers in most situations. Okay, but also in rare situations, we may want to draw more attention to the person, places, or thing that is acted upon rather than the person, places, or thing that perform the action. So sometimes we should use the passive voice more than the active voice. For example, the White House was defaced by graffiti artists in the early house of Independence Day. Okay, because the White House is a symbol of the strength and pride for many Americans, the author wants us to pay more attention to the tragedy that has happened rather than the criminal who performed the acts. And it generates more sympathy for what has happened, especially on a day where what the White House stands for is supposed to be celebrated. Okay, I know that active voice are more easier to use. However, we should use passive voice when we are unsure about something. Like for like another situation where we may want to use passive voice is when we don't know who or what is supposed to perform the action. Like so, the restroom will be clean at 6 a.m. daily. You see here, we don't have someone who is cleaning. Like, we don't know who would be cleaning. So we would use the passive voice when we are unsure about the person who's going to perform the action. The person who would be cleaning might be anybody, but we don't know for sure who it is. So we would use passive voice like this. The restroom will be clean at 6 a.m. daily. It still makes sense. And yeah, we still make our point. Okay, while we do that, the restroom will be clean. We do not need to know who will be cleaning them, so we just use passive voice. Sometimes it is better to use them. Well, thank you for coming and have a great day.